All right, good afternoon, everyone. I'm happy you're still all here. My name is Wander MEIJER from GlobeScan. I'm going to lead the following session, and we're going to talk about sustainable finance, which maybe sound a bit complicated, but we're going to link it to social enterprises, but especially what it can mean in practice for a happier society. Because Paula earlier talked about action, and actually today, or the next hour, we're going to talk about a lot of practical solutions. Rather than having more speeches, we give examples how finance can help to change the world, how finance can make us a happier society. So with me, and I think they're now behind me actually, we've got our distinguished panelists. First, I think you met her before, or you saw her before, Paula DIPERNA from the Carbon Disclosure Project. Paula will give a short introduction speech, and then we're going into the panel with questions, but most important, you will be part of the panel. We're going to use the Slido again, and you can ask questions to the group over here. Next to Paula, we've got Leonie KELLY from the Sustainable Finance Initiative. And when we start a discussion, she will particularly explain what actually does sustainable finance mean? How does it work in practice, and how can it help changing society? Then we've got Anne-Maria SALONIUS from the Aland Bank, flew in from Finland, where it's even colder than in many other countries. And this bank, it's quite particular because they have a very special credit card. Now, for those of you who have at least 1 or 2 or 3 credit cards in your pocket, she will explain actually how this credit card can help changing the world, making a better place. And then last but not least, we've got Pat-nie WOO, who works for KPMG. No further introduction for this big famous company. Pat is actually from origin, I believe, an accountant or accountancy background, but he will also explain what KPMG does in the whole realm of sustainability, and he will talk particularly about mainland China and what sustainable finance, green bonds, and the whole finance issues on the changing society means. So we've got about 1 hour, I think, so we're not going to do too many speeches, but of course, since he had an eloquent speech already earlier, but now on a different topic, although related. Paula, first to you.
Hello, everyone. I had to do something else, so I didn't relax while you were all having your breathing. But you don't have to answer this, but is there anyone in this room who is more than 44 years old? Okay. Anybody who is under 25? Okay. So what I'm going to just briefly give you is a little sense of the journey from the individual to the systems that these panelists are going to talk about. And my topic is really the growth in what we call sustainable investing, environment for using money for environment positive development, social development, and keeping an eye on how companies are operating, ESG. So about 45 years ago, no one had ever heard of sustainable development, sustainable finance. And there were a couple of individuals, a couple of change makers, who decided that maybe they could use their money and their heart to change the world. And so they created a few funds, mutual funds, that they knew wouldn't make money right away and maybe never make money. So they began to invest just on a moral impulse. And they continued to develop this kind of green investing, and the mainstream capitalists looked at them like they were crazy, and you're just going to waste your money. But they kept at it, kept at it, kept at it, kept at it. And 46 years later, roughly speaking, we now have a completely different idea of what the purpose of money is. And for those of you who are involved with social entrepreneurship and social enterprise, it's very easy to think, well, the money is going in another direction from the direction that I need it to go in. But there's a lot of momentum now behind the idea that money has a purpose other than itself. So I'm just going to give you some statistics which are pretty impressive coming from the United States. And then leave it at that so that you can ask questions of the panel. So from these individuals, the change makers, when no dollars were, relatively speaking, being invested in, let's call it social progress or environmental progress, just in the last 2 years in the United States, there's been a 38% increase in what is called screening, where you look at your investment and you screen out bad things and screen in good things. So 38% increase just in the last 2 years. Now, in the United States, the annual investment is in the trillions of dollars. So about 8 years ago, 1 in $12 was screened for environmental purpose or social purpose. In 2016, that number jumped to 1 in $5. So in a very short time, a significant increase in the number of dollars that were being screened by investors and others for social and environmental purpose. And just in the last 2 years now, we've had another jump. So it's now 1 in $4. So when you're thinking about funding models and looking into how you can support your social enterprises, there are a lot of new tools out there. And the professor from Oxford, Alex, was talking about the hybrid funding model and impact investing, social enterprise investing. And so there's a lot of potential out there, and many more interested people, many more people you can pitch to. And those of you who make investments, there are a lot of tools that you can use that bring your dollars closer to environmental or social progress. So I just wanted to set that up a little bit for you, and we'll be, of course, answering questions. But the panelists have a lot more detail on this journey from the individual to the system. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Paula. So the coming session can be sometimes a bit technical. So if you have a question already coming up, please put it into your smartphone. That worked very well in the previous session. And then the questions will come on the screen. You can vote on questions if you don't know anything yourself. And then we can see which questions we're going to answer. So I think you can see it coming up there. But before we go there, maybe Leonie Kelly, you can explain a bit more about the whole concept about sustainable finance, what it means in Hong Kong, and give some practical examples as well.
Sure. Thanks, Wander. So I think it's important to make the distinction. We often talk about ESG investing and get quite caught up in the technical detail. But at Sustainable Finance Initiative and how the broader market looks at sustainable finance today is that sustainable finance is really an umbrella term, looking to integrate environmental, social, and economic considerations into the investment or financial considerations within a business for the larger benefit of society at large. So looking to invest in, environmental or social projects that can create a financial return. But it's also important to think about sustainable finance as a spectrum, and Professor Nichols mentioned this earlier in his presentation, that sustainable finance really is about a spectrum of different investment strategies that you can deploy to actively become more, put your money towards work that has intentional purpose. So there's 6 or 7 different investment strategies that one could apply to doing that. And we've heard Paula speak about negative screening, so looking at taking away kind of investments in one's portfolio that could be invested in tobacco, weapons, or arms. Another one of those investment strategies is also called positive screening, so bringing in the positive environmental social benefits that you can create with your capital. We also hear a lot today about the Sustainable Development Goals, and another category would be SDG investing, so looking to align your capital in a way that targets and delivers the Sustainable Development Goals today. And also we hear a lot about impact investing. So impact investing is really how can I create environmental or social impact alongside a financial return. What's important to remember with all those different strategies is that risk, impact, and financial return varies across those different investment strategies. And there is a role within that spectrum for philanthropic capital as well. So it's about, as we always say at the Sustainable Finance Initiative, really that impact and the impact that you want to create really is in the eye of the beholder. There is a role for concessionary capital within the market, and there is a role for thematic investing if you're looking to create higher financial returns as well.
And any examples, because this is quite a technical story, how you can give how do you do this in Hong Kong and what's happening in that space?
Yeah. So I think when we look at Hong Kong, you mentioned some figures as well, but the industry as a whole is around $23 trillion under management that's sustainably invested. Asia represents only 0.2% of that capital. So in the US, yes, it's every $1 is invested into sustainable investing today. I think in Asia it's a different story, but Asia is also catching up. Pat-nie will speak a little bit more about China and the developments there. So I think in terms of the products and in terms of the financial instruments here, it means that we're a little bit behind in terms of what is available. I think we're seeing a lot more focus now, especially with the development of the Green Finance Association in Hong Kong, looking at where can Hong Kong play a role in the development of green bonds, which I'm sure Pat-nie will speak about as well. But also looking at the role of social impact and how can we think about social impact bonds, for example, and do they have a role in helping tackle some of the social issues that we face in Hong Kong. But I think in terms of products, we do tend to lean a lot on the US and European markets in the product supply today, and that is changing, and that's something that we at the Sustainable Finance Initiative are trying to work with private investors to really help increase demand for these types of instruments and product availability in Hong Kong, so we can help the growth of the sustainable finance market more broadly.
Thank you. You already almost automatically passed on to Pat-nie, so I come to you later. Can you give a bit of the state of play, Pat, in China? I mean, not just about sustainable finance, but more, is there more investing in ESG green bonds? What's the state of play if you compare that what Paula said earlier in America, and then we come to Europe in a minute. So what's the current state of play in, call it sustainable investing or more ESG investing in the mainland?
Yeah, I think in terms of where China is, as Leonie mentioned, the Asian portion of sustainable investment is still a very small portion. That's Asia ex-Japan. Japan has actually grown a lot in the past few years simply because the government pension fund, which has over $1 trillion under investment, has decided to put moving forward up to 10% of the investment in this space. So that's why the market has grown a lot in Japan. With regards to China, I think the focus has predominantly been in the green finance and green bond space. I think 3 years ago, the People's Bank of China came up with a guideline on developing the green finance ecosystem. Since then, there has been a lot of policy directives from Beijing to drive the green finance market. And I think last year, China is the biggest issuer of green bonds globally. So I know this is a social enterprise summit. It's not just about green finance, but I think that that's where a lot of the focus still has been in China. In terms of social bonds, I think maybe the first one just came out, I think, this year. So that is still a very nascent space. I think the way that people think about it in China remains at that kind of like, okay, the green finance aspect, which is kind of still a kind of thematic aspect. But when we're talking about the global market of $23 trillion under management, that's really about kind of like integrating it into investment decisions. It's not just about thematic. Thematic is only a small portion of that 23 trillion. It's about just general funds and just looking at it from not just a financial return lens, but also an ESG lens when making investment decisions. With that regard, I think China is still, not very mature in that space. Hong Kong remains, the ecosystem is still not quite there, and, kudos to the Sustainable Finance Initiative to drive up that space. There is a lot more talk about it. Even this year, we feel in Hong Kong, the SFC, the Securities and Futures Commission, has talked about this as well recently. So I think it is getting a lot more airtime. And I foresee that, in the coming year, things will begin to change.
Good, thank you. As I said earlier, it is maybe a bit technical, so there's also a question here how do green bonds work, but I'd like to bring it a bit back also at this stage to more our day-to-day lives. So how can we make sure that finance helps in changing society, making it a happy society, maybe helps how it can fund social enterprises, and maybe from America and China, I'd like to go to Europe. So Anne-Maria, maybe you can give an example first how sustainable finance, ESG, works in Northern Europe, and then give an example about a product of your bank, and maybe tell also a little bit about the Aland Bank, because I think it's not a very well-known bank yet in Hong Kong. So maybe explain a bit about your Finnish bank as well.
Thank you. First, the ESG. So it's the same growing interest which Paula just described in the US, and we see more and more assignments of the United Nations principle for responsible invest. But it's also the regulation in the European Union. There are coming demands all the time. But I think also what we see is the customer demands. They want to invest to the products and companies which act responsibility. And also the investors, they are demanding more risk premium if the company is not acting responsibly. But so I'm representing the Bank of Aland from Finland. It's a small bank in the far away in the Nordic countries. We have our operation in Finland and Sweden, headquarters in the Åland Islands, middle of the Baltic Sea. We have our target group, high net worth and individuals and their companies. We have about 100,000 customers and 700 employees, and I'm head of our operations in Finland. So we have operations Finland, Sweden, and the Åland Islands. So mostly for the private persons. And you asked about why I am here and what we can do as a banking sector also, so we can activate you all guys here. So we have actually changed the tool for consumptions as an instrument for nature. In the Nordics we have, and in the Northern Europe, we have the highest penetration of the credit cards and digital transformations, and we have also the dying sea. And our bank, we are doing a lot of financing for good projects to save the Baltic Sea. But in the end, to save the Baltic Sea and save the environment, it depends on climate change. And consumer behavior has huge impact on climate change. It's approximately 70% of Finland's consumer carbon footprint comes from consumer behavior. So we have created the world's first credit card, which has combined with the Åland Index, which measures the carbon footprint of each transactions. So when our customers do their purchases with the credit card, they don't see only the amount of the purchases, they see also the environmental impact of each purchases in grams and in euros. So they are seeing the carbon footprint. And we are presenting this in their mobile app. They can compare and track their behavior over time, and we are offering then possibility to give money to the nature conservation. So we are collaborating with WWF. So that's our innovations.
I think it's a great innovation. Wouldn't you all like to have a credit card that every time you buy something, it shows your carbon footprint? Maybe it would always make you feel better, but I think it would be very visible what the impact would be of any purchase you do. But at the same time, I think it helps in practice to save the Baltic Sea, which actually is a sea close to Finland, Russia, in that cold corner of I would say, of Northern Europe.
Yeah.
If you have any questions about this credit card, please ask them, because I think I'm very interested in how we could perhaps do that in Hong Kong and convince HSBC to have a similar credit card That every time you buy something, it shows your carbon footprint, but also what you can do to offset it. One question earlier, I think sometimes we tested, actually it was yesterday in another symposium, that when you fly with Cathay Pacific, you can also offset your carbon footprint when you fly, and to see you can buy carbon credits. And hardly anybody knows this, and even less people do this. So actually, there are mechanisms to offset your environmental impact. And going back to there, because Paula started actually with the examples of America, where sustainable finance has become, I would say, earlier mainstream than here, correct? So what can we learn? How can we make it more quickly mainstream in Hong Kong or Asia in general?
Well, it goes back to the microphone. It goes back to Changemaker because, you know, as I said in my earlier remarks, it's lonely in the vanguard. And so if you go back these 45 years, and the reason I asked you all, you know, how old you might be, is to understand how long this has taken and now how much acceleration is occurring. And this is a very encouraging sign. I mean, truly, for 45 years, this environmental investing was outside the loop, and now it's very much more inside the loop. So what we can learn from the United States, which has the, you know, a big starter of the problem, and where it gets back to individual transformation, is you create an environment where it's abnormal not to be thinking about environmental investment. And so for those of you who have business ideas that capture environmental progress or social progress, try to think that you're not alone in the financial world, that there has been a huge acceleration in so what used to be the vanguard is now quite ordinary and mainstream. And so I think the lesson to take is that Hong Kong can really move faster because there's a lot of groundwork already been done. And just take this credit card. You know, you can ask, well, what's the point? I saw I spent 1,100 euros and that I owe the bank, and I owe the environment, let's say, 1,000 euros. What am I going to do with that information? I won't sleep. I owe the bank's going to collect the 100 euros. The environment's never going to collect the 1,000 euros. So I have no problem. I can afford the 100, I can't afford the 1,000. But what the difference is that now I know that I can adapt and change my behavior, or I might donate that $1,000 to WWF. So it's becoming abnormal not to think this way. And so when you're out there thinking about building a business plan, or as I said earlier, if you are investors trying to figure out how to use your money, it's much more normal now to be thinking of these issues as we've been describing them than they were even just 5 years ago. And as I said, 45 years ago, it was really foreign, alien, like from Mars.
Yes. I mean, you can react on each other. I prefer that, actually. So please go ahead. Yes.
Yeah, I think, I mean, I just wanted to respond with the view that a lot of people still think that ESG investing, there is kind of like you have to take a hit on the return. So as Leonie mentioned, I mean, there is a big spectrum. So, I mean, you know, some of the impact investment space can be similar to venture capital, which is very high risk. But if it's kind of like negative screening or ESG integration investing, studies have shown that actually there is positive correlation to returns. So from a Hong Kong or an Asian standpoint, I think it's really important to advocate this point that we're not just talking about thematic investment, we're talking about integrating ESG into your investment decision. You may start with kind of negative screening, and then move towards ESG integration. But, you know, I think that this whole idea that it's going to cost you to do it, that mentality and that mindset, I think, needs to be broken for it to go mainstream.
Yes, I know there are some questions. I think that's a very good one, because I want this one to ask to Leonie. Can we help, because you're trying to create a sustainable finance ecosystem in Hong Kong, right? So can we help, can we influence, can we force, can we change the MPF funds in Hong Kong in a way that they spend more money on sustainable finance? Yeah, so everybody here in this room is either voluntary, and most of us, I guess, involuntary, have an MPF account where basically money is being put and then you don't know what's happening with it. So can you give some examples, or maybe what can we do to change or influence it? I know it's a hard one perhaps, but go ahead.
That's a big question. I would say in short it needs to happen. I think what, there should be within our pension options the option to invest sustainably. But I think for that to happen, we as individuals owning and looking into our pension funds need to actually push for that change as well. And we need to be, I would say, responsible investors with our own capital and making those decisions to push for change with the pensions. But I think internationally we've started to see that sustainable finance has really become a regulatory imperative now as well. So we've seen governments around the world and pension funds, Pat-nie already mentioned Japan, kind of really starting to lead the way in terms of thinking about exposure within pensions to environmental risk and climate change risk, and thinking about this as, if you're not factoring this into your portfolio as a risk, as a price risk, it's simply not smart investing. So how do we make that mainstream in that thinking, that this becomes routine, as Paula was saying, because that really is what mainstreaming is. I would say today it's not a mainstream concept yet, certainly not in Asia. Yes, we've seen a growth in the number of events and conferences focused and speaking about sustainable finance. But it's only earlier this week that the high-level expert group on sustainable finance, that's led by the European Commission, there's been a paper come out actually looking at all of these different initiatives have been developed, different kind of standards and protocols, but actually where has the capital been flowing to, and have we activated impact capital to meet some of these issues? So I think to come back to the MPF, I think we as an individual investor should be looking to push for change. And I think with the development of the Green Finance Association and looking at how we can start to look at developments like the climate-related financial disclosures, which we've seen happen in the UK and Europe more broadly, those types of initiatives will start to push for change as well.
Good. And from here, yes, I'd like to go to you, because one of the questions I'm having actually continuously, how can we, and I'm not looking at the screen because I had a question actually in the front, when we make things more mainstream, how can we engage the consumers? Yeah, how do you engage your consumers in making this credit card basically known, acceptable, and is it successful? So how can we merely make something which is a big picture idea, not just making it mainstream, but also very popular among consumers? What you've done, and how does it work? How successful is it?
Yeah, I think in common, we people, we want to do good things, but we are also quite lazy one. So it should be easy for us. And there are many different kind of carbon footprint calculations available in the internet. But you should be really interested about the issue to searching for them. By connecting the index to the credit card, so you can't avoid seeing your environmental impact. So we really wanted to raise the awareness about this issue and everybody to think about the environmental impact. And so it has been huge success. We have changed all the credit cards in our company, though, and our card doesn't promote hierarchy. Instead of hierarchy, the card promotes cause care and policy engagement. And the card itself, it's also biodegradable. It's used by maize or corn, so it's biodegradable material. And we have been several times invited to the United Nations in New York and in Bonn to present the idea as a concrete example to implement the Paris Agreement. And we have been also promoting this idea overall the world, different kind of events. Our customers are feeling very proud. They are posting pictures of this credit card in social media. And I think employees in our bank, we are also very proud that we are really thinking that there is meaning what we are working.
Excellent. Now I have a question for the whole panel, so maybe you look at the screen, because I think one thing which is actually, it's being voted a bit more than others, but I think it makes a lot of sense. What as a person, an individual, as a consumer, without too much technical finance background, what can you do to promote sustainable finance or impact investing, without spending money on itself? So what can you do as an individual? So maybe you talk as an individual or as an expert, or the combination of both. What can you do to promote sustainable finance impact investing? And Leonie mentioned earlier, you push your investors, but that's quite difficult sometimes when you just get your statement from an MPF provider every month. So what can we do as consumers? What can we do as individuals to promote sustainable finance or impact investing?
I have my own. So
Private microphone.
that's a very good question, because I have hardly, I've learned a lot, but I had no financial background at all when I became involved in these issues. I was very much more focused on the environmental side than the finance side, and I have completely changed my opinion, which is I have to be 100% focused on the financial side. And I would say, I'll just throw this out in terms of a social business, if, financial literacy, like the change maker, the math centrum, and even though he was doing it voluntarily, there's probably a lot of need for financial literacy in Hong Kong and everywhere in the world, where you could have a new kind of financial literacy, which includes the environmental piece, and start, doing classes once a week, just as he did with the math, tutoring. So what individuals can do is tutor their parents, or when you go to let's say 7-Eleven, and this happens a lot in Hong Kong, happens everywhere, but very particularly in Hong Kong, whatever you buy, they ask you if you would like bottled water, every 7-Eleven. And I didn't even think I'm thirsty till somebody asked me if I want a bottle of water. And we can just say no, thank you. Just don't ask me. I'm not thirsty. Why did you ask me? My thing is resist, reject, and rebel. And so, anyone who hasn't got any financial background, those are the three things that I would suggest. And, besides spending, the question says, what can you do besides spending? It is about spending. If you have no other power, you have political power, but if you feel that you have no other power, then spending is your power. And that is as Anne-Maria said, in Finland, 70% of the carbon footprint is consumer behavior. And we can all change our behavior, but not just quietly, meekly, that we just do it. We have to say why. You have to tell your friends why, your colleagues why, your parents why, your children why. And this eventually becomes a path of change, I think.
So just remember, if I remember it correctly, resist, reject, and rebound. And that's not only... Rebel, yes. And that's not only when you are being asked for a bottle of water in a 7-Eleven, but the same when they ask you for, you need it back in the supermarket, because it's still being asked. I think you had an urge to talk.
I have urge to talk. I think here in this room, all the people are the part of interesting about the issue. But I really, there's one thing you all in this room can do. So I invite you all to offer the Aland Index to your banks in your countries. We are offering the index for free. As I said, our bank has 100,000 customers, and we want to change the consumer behavior and really prevent the climate change, so mitigate the climate change. So please offer the index to your banks in your countries.
So how can you do that?
You can just ask your bank advisor that why isn't my card showing the environmental impact? And if they are interesting and you are demanding, so they might give a call to Anne-Maria, and we have to call by internet. We have a lot of, United Nations is promoting the idea, so you are getting a lot of contacts from banks overall the world. We have now discussions with banks from 12 countries about implementing the Aland Index. So please offer the index to your banks.
Good. You want to react on that? because you work for one of the biggest firms in the world. So how about KPMG promoting that and saying together with the other big accountancy firms, we're going to help them implementing this index? Or
Yes, so KPMG Finland is already working with Aland Bank. We're verifying their data. And our partner in Finland emailed me today and said, Anne-Maria is going to be on your panel. Please say hello to her for me. So I think absolutely, it's a great initiative. And hopefully more banks will, implement it. But I think that it's all about supply and demand, right? And I mean, is there demand out there? That's what we hear a lot of the time, is that there isn't a demand. And where does demand come from? It comes from each and every one of us. So I've always said that, effectively, where you put your money, you're effectively voting for how you want this world to be run. And if you don't care where you're putting your money and whether that corporation is doing something good or bad to the environment or to society, or you are putting your investment dollars or your MPF into, without a care towards these aspects, we're actually voting for just a pure single bottom line financial business model, which is what this world is run on at the moment. The MPF aspect, so there is actually one fund in the MPF, so it's with, I'm not doing I'm not kind of like trying to sell their product, but AIA is the only one that has one of the funds offered in the MPF with that. But the demand for it is very low.
But I think I would say the demand in question is a bit dubious, because there was no demand for a smartphone before it existed, right? So you can also create demand, and you can push demand, and you can make sure that people are asking for it. So it is a bit how active you do want to be.
So I think that, a lot of it goes back to education, because a lot of people is not thinking about it. So it goes back to that financial literacy aspect. But I think, in terms of how these MPF trustees or MPF companies are run, they are managed by the MPF Association. And whether the MPF Association is asking these questions towards these service providers, that's also something that we need to question.
Good. I'm going back a bit later on to specifically about social enterprises, but there's one question which I think is a very valuable one, specifically for you, Leonie. Do you think sustainable finance is mostly motivated by government guidelines, or can we do something differently? So is it mostly motivated by government guidelines, or is it demand from consumers, or somewhere in between? Maybe talk a bit about that one.
To be honest, I think it's both. I think internationally as well, it's been carrot and stick in terms of development of the market. So we've seen policy and regulation come in US and European markets, and now we're starting to see that happen in Asia. But beyond policy, I think it's also investors creating that demand for sustainable finance has led to the growth in it as well. So it's not simply policy has helped, certainly, and we mentioned earlier very briefly the climate finance related disclosures, which were launched under Mark Carney, looking at how can corporates start to think about and price climate risk into their businesses, because this is it is a risk to investors who are invested in these organizations, and how can we start to quantify that in the kind of profit and loss statement, as Pat-nie mentioned, kind of thinking beyond a single bottom line to a triple bottom line. What does that mean for corporates today? So I think it's been a mixture of policy, regulatory, and demand. And I think what we're seeing in Hong Kong, more specifically in Asia, is a kind of a growth in interest from millennials and next gen for sustainable finance. And I think that certainly gives us hope within Hong Kong, because yes, the market in the UK has, we've seen a lot of policy developments and pensions stepping up to look at how you integrate ESG into the investment decisions, and that also needs to happen here. But a report that was released by the SFC earlier this year noted that 33% of Hong Kong's asset under management is within private banking and wealth. So if we can move even a tiny percentage of that 33% towards ESG investing, I think that will make a big difference specifically in Hong Kong. So it's going to be a mixture of policy from top-down push, but also bottom-up demand. We have to, as consumers, be creating that demand for the two to come together.
Exactly. Well, I was expecting to do that because, of course, and then we get a question bringing it back to social enterprise. Can you clarify how social enterprises fit into a discussion about sustainable investing? And it's a very good question. Paula and I had this discussion actually a few days ago. So you're the perfect person to answer that.
Since I bugged you to do it, I would like to answer it. So, back again to the individual and the system. And it depends on the size of the enterprise. But, assuming that the idea of the enterprise is to become a business and look for, self-sustenance in the business model, or even the hybrid model, you need investors. You need somebody to invest, whether it's a lot of money or a little bit of money. And so where this all fits in is, again, the sustainable investing field is much more welcoming to the kinds of concepts that a social enterprise would bring to the marketplace. And that's the clarification, that's the key. That you won't be attempting to raise capital in a hostile environment, even as hostile as it was maybe 10 years ago. It's so much less hostile now. So the climate, so to speak, for social enterprises to be successful now is actually much better than it was just a few years ago. Now, easy to say because it's still not 100%, but it's a large percentage, as I just said. In the United States, it's about 26% of the money being invested would be more friendly to a social enterprise. In Asia, it's less of a percentage. Now, somebody else asked about impact. So this is another place where the two come together, because capital investors look for impact. They're looking for revenue, they're looking for return, but they also are more and more interested in intangible impact, intangible results. And the more you can develop a metric or a statement about how you have converted an intangible benefit, like happiness, let's say, or like in one of the local projects that was mentioned, I think he became an Ashoka Fellow, which was to relieve domestic servants of the debt burden that they carry around from job to job, because the employment agencies charge them instead of the employer for being placed. So you get a job as a domestic, but you carry this debt around your whole career. So the breakthrough idea was to move that debt from the domestic worker to the employer. So the same with sustainable investing and the same with social enterprise. If your project is moving the needle in terms of a social benefit, the sustainable investing community is more able to see it, even than it was just a few years ago. I don't know if that helps answer the question.
Just to pick up on that point as well, I think certainly where social enterprise comes into sustainable investing is probably more so within the impact investing bucket of sustainable finance. And to kind of be an active social enterprise within that sphere, or receiving capital under impact investing, I think one of the key words is measurement. How are you actually, as a social enterprise, quantifying your environmental or social impact? And what is your strategy for doing that? Because that is going to be really your tool, your storytelling tool beyond the qualitative data that you have to help investors understand the impact that you're creating. And I think Professor Nichols also mentioned, there's many different measurement strategies out there today that help social enterprise do that. And I think Hong Kong is starting to pick up on that and look at these different measurement strategies and how they can be applied to the social enterprise. For example, there's social return on investment studies. There are simple cost-benefit analysis studies that social enterprises can pick up as tools You can go onto the Global Impact Investing Network and access many toolkits within there and try to understand where does a social enterprise fit within the, this big machine of sustainable investing that is $23 trillion. I would say it's very important to be trying to understand how you measure that non-financial impact and disclosing that to potential investors to become more active in this space.
Thank you. I think what we're measuring here, what we talk about here, that the return on finance is not just a number anymore, how much money you make on your money. It is, of course, it has the triple bottom line we mentioned earlier. It has to have a positive impact on environment and social too, not just on making a return on investment. So maybe we can go to that question there, Pat, and then going to you, Anna-Maria. Practically, how do you as an investor measure the impact? So, of course, to measure impact on money, that's a relatively easy one. But how do we measure the impact overall? What is an ESG investor looking at in social enterprise? How do you measure that impact, the social impact next to the financial impact? How do you measure that?
I think it was mentioned kind of like the social return on investment, that aspect, and SROI has been doing quite a lot of work here in Hong Kong already. My understanding is that the SIE fund has done a number of workshops and do ask social enterprises those questions. So, I think that it is important to understand the impact. I think the difference is a lot of the time we have to distinguish between kind of output, outcome, and impact. Maybe a lot of traditionally in the philanthropic space, I think it has been really output-centric, where you've reached X number of people, whatever. But what actually happened, I think this whole theory of change, this whole kind of pay-for-success model is really important, and that's where the kind of like the social impact bonds come in, where the investors are really looking for specific outcomes and specific impacts. And if you're able to achieve that, then there's a certain level of return. So I think that, that aspect is very important to move away from this output thinking into that outcome and what actually changed, what actually happened. And, there are methodologies out there. There is a social impact course, SROI course that you can take. So I think that there is a lot of, to educate yourself, but I think it is very important to move into that outcome and impact thinking process.
Thanks. I think you want to add on that.
It's just a short comment. I think it's just, as you said, and it's a question of transparency and you see the impact of your investments. But what is the big work which we are doing all now? It's the creating the common standards and definitions and taxonomy. There is so different kind of standards now, so it's quite impossible to the investor or to the customer to find out what's really the one which I should trust. So it's important that we create these common standards and definitions.
I would say, because we're still, if we take a step back kind of from, I think sustainable finance is still quite at an early stage of development more broadly. And so are all the guidelines in terms of how do we measure, should we be looking at this strategy over this one, is that better than the next? And I think what's common between all the different measurement strategies and certainly looking at social enterprise is the concept of, well, what are the impact values that you have within the social enterprise, and being very transparent on those, and showing the commitment to, as Pat-nie mentioned, kind of identifying what is your theory of change and the associated kind of strategy and measurement that you have behind that. But identifying the impact values is often the first step that a social enterprise might take in setting out an impact measurement framework, and then thinking about some of the common key performance indicators that your peers are measuring and reporting against as well. You could look at tools like the impact reporting investment standards. You could look at the SDGs. which has a lot of different metrics, 189, I believe. But, you know, what's important there is, again, well, what is the, you know, why are you measuring? It's not just for measurement's sake. So, you know, a measurement costs, so it has to, you know, be of a fundamental value to the social enterprise and, you know, the purpose that you're trying to create. Is it to increase capital flow to the social enterprise? Is it to get involved in these social impact bonds? So it's important to think about the intentionality of the measurement as well.
Yeah.
I think, you know, we talked a lot about kind of like impact, social and environmental impact, but I think that you know, my observation of the social enterprise space is that the level of rigor in the business model is less rigorous than the traditional entrepreneurs. And if we don't want social enterprise to be kind of thought of as a separate thing, but as just general entrepreneurs, I think that that level of rigor that those other entrepreneurs in the tech world or whatever, that amount that they get questioned on that, on their business model, that level of rigor is also needed in the social enterprise space. So, you know, a number of our colleagues are these so-called social angels who actually try to mentor these social enterprises. And that is kind of like a lot of the work we do with them is really challenge that business model. Yes, I understand that we want to see that social impact or the environmental impact. But if the business model is not sustainable, then, you know, the whole thing is not sustainable. So how do we make the whole thing sustainable? Very important.
Yes, I fully agree. And I think often things when I look at social enterprises, I think it should become a little bit more, call it corporate rigor. And I think most corporates should become a little bit more social. If we bring those two together, I think the world would be a better place or perhaps a happier society. Going back to your Aland Bank, because I still believe, and I'm quite fascinated by, as you may have noticed, by this idea of a credit card which makes it so simple to see what your impact is and to change the world. So how successful has it been? Because we talked about, okay, you've got your customers and it looks like a great story, but did you, and you said you didn't have to work hard for it, but how do customers understand it and apply it? Because they have to trust your bank as well. It all goes according to what you say you do. So you have a great trust level. Did you do anything special? And if all these things you say yes, how can we then still make it more mainstream and quickly adaptable here, rather than people here going to HSBC or to Hang Seng Bank or whatever bank and telling it they have to do it? Because I'd like to see how we can amplify or in modern words, scale that model. So what are your success elements which can quite easily transplant it to East Asia?
And it's really, we are seeing that increasing amount of our customers to our bank, and as I said, we have got a lot of global publicity, but it's also very important that you can trust, as you said, to the data. And we haven't created any new data, so we have used the most best data available, Thomson Reuters and Sustainalytics analysis about the carbon footprints of the companies, and then it's actually it's KPMG who has helped us to validate this data and put these companies to the MasterCard category codes. And we have our own IT company who has combined the index to the card. So it's very easy and transparent, and the data, and we do also a lot of information communication with our customers, what they can, we want them to change behavior. Together with the WWF, we do a lot of communications. But I think the key point is that it should be really easy and transparent, and also described in that way that everyone can understand. I think we have engaged our clients as agents for change. So in that way, they are very proud, and they are also recruiting more customers to our bank.
Well, that actually is the next question. Did it change actual behavior? Can you did you see whether it changed behavior as well from your customers? After they used the credit card and they could see the carbon footprint, etc., did you measure or could you measure that actually their purchase behavior, their social behavior became different?
We launched the credit card in the end of 2016, so it's quite new statistic. Our customers can track their behavior over time. They can compare the months with their carbon footprints, and they can that way change the behavior. And they can compare their behavior also to the average customer. When we are negotiating with other banks, we are also discussing about sharing the data. I don't have a lot of statistics to tell here right now, but we are just working on that we see the impact in our customers, with our 100,000 customers. But when we are offering to the other banks, so it's the important part of the discussion. It's very interesting to see the results.
Yes, and you can in a minute. So yes, I mean, I work for a research company, and everything what you measure in general, it changes behavior already. That's in general known. When people see what they do, it almost automatically already impacts behavior rather than pushing them. So the way that you think makes transparent is changing behavior already in general. We've got about 5 to 10 minutes more, so if you have more questions, please put them into your tablet, put them in your smartphone, and then we're closing off in 5 or 10 minutes. But of course, I'd like to go to Paula from the country where people have at least 5 or 10 credit cards each and the biggest cars in the world and the most cars in the world. So would it be a successful product potentially in America, or would you have other ideas on that?
Well, first of all, I have a card, and very happy to use it. I use it all over the world. I've been to Bangkok with it. I buy a lot of things with it, and I just have looked at my footprint, and I this morning realized that buying a book, one book was 0.7 kilograms of CO2. I like books. I'd like to see, what the monthly bill would be if I read online, but it's already, to your point, to Wander's point, it's a very important point that information does become the foundation of change. But what I wanted to point out also, just to clarify something that may have been unclear earlier about my view of innovation. Obviously, I believe strongly in innovation, but what's so important about this credit card, I think brings it back to all of you, is the innovation was a second stage. The credit card was old hat, an old technology, boring actually. But what was the innovation was what was built onto it. And Anna-Maria just said they used existing metrics, existing standards. But the innovation was, one, to think of doing it, and two, to do it, and now take it to another level. So it's a kind of, there must be a term in management lexicon for this second stage innovation. But sometimes that's what a change is. It's to build on a foundation and not go through all the proving, not have to start all over. Anna-Maria was able to build on something that was very substantial and trusted, and of course very common. We were all using credit cards, and now she could revolutionize actually what a credit card is for. It's a personal accounting to the environment is what our credit card is. And that's a huge change, but it was not the original idea of the credit card. So I just wanted to point that out.
Can we in Hong Kong apply for the credit card? Or?
We will with pleasure offer it in Hong Kong, but our bank doesn't operate in Hong Kong, but you can ask your bank, consumer demand, ask your bank to implement the index. So we are offering the index for free to any other bank who wants to be part of the solution. So you can get a card, yes.
I get a card?
If you want to be a customer in my bank, so you're very welcome. So it's customer recruiting here also.
So we just go online and just apply for a credit card, even though we don't live in Finland? Or
no, you have to show your passport to me, and I'm your personal advisor. No, we are not an internet bank. That's why we are offering the index to the other banks in every country.
Good. Well, it's not a commercial advertising here. We've got 5 minutes. We've got 5 minutes left, ladies and gentlemen. So if you have any more questions, please go. Please ask. I think I really like the phrase what Paula said earlier. So this credit card is a personal accounting to the environment. Yeah. So it's a personal thing. What you see, what linked to the environment, and maybe also linked to social impact. I think, Leonie, you're nodding, or you're just nodding.
I definitely agree. I think if we can create these products in Hong Kong, I think certainly in the retail space, it was something I was going to mention earlier, the retail impact products have been quite lacking behind. Like we have a lot of, we don't have a lot, but we have more ESG funds available, which often aren't accessible to the retail investor, to the everyday investor. So I think we do need to see more innovative products coming out like this in the market. I think it was only last week in the UK a new retail impact product was launched called the Big Exchange, so working with the Big Issue and other ESG fund houses to provide ESG investment opportunities to make those available to retail investors. And I think the minimum investment is £100 to simply invest in these 30 to 40 impact funds that have been selected to be on this big exchange. We need to see more of that, and there's no reason why I believe in Hong Kong that we couldn't create something like this as well, a big social enterprise exchange. But to get on that and to rank on that as an exchange, it's important again to come back to this idea of measurement. Somebody asked there, what are sustainable investors looking for in social enterprises, and I think it comes down to that. What is the non-financial performance as well as the financial performance of the social enterprise, and being very transparent around the method and how you're measuring that.
There's one question here. It said, would sustainable investments compromise its quality of impacts? I mean, social enterprises working hard on returns to investments than its social impacts. I think there's always a balance, right? I mean, everything what we mentioned earlier, of course you can be fully focused on your social impacts, but then sometimes it turns into a philanthropy. And we're talking about social enterprises here. So there has to be a balance between social impact and a return on investments. And of course, traditionally, it was only about return on investments. If we only focus on social impacts, then I would say it's more of an NGO or foundation or a charity, which is nothing wrong with that, but that's not a social enterprise. So I think it's a different definition. So I think that's it. Anything else on this? I've had one simple question. It's gone now, but I think I still would like to ask it to Anne-Maria again, because it's important that people can see this. Can we see this index anywhere on the internet? Can we find it? Can we find this index? Is it publicly available? You know, what we just discussed. You said the index is open, of people all the banks can subscribe to it. So can people look at it? Can people find it somewhere?
It's in our bank's internet site. There is one kind of demo about the index, how it works, and you can read more in the BalticSeaProject.com website. So there is.
Say it again. How?
BalticSeaProject.com.
BalticSeaProject.com. Baltic,
Yes.
It's from the sea, just below Finland.
Yes, BalticSeaProject.com. Yes, it's the sea which we are saving. Yeah. So there is more information.
Okay, I've got a last question perhaps to close off with, because we're talking here today about working towards a happier society. Now, we discussed already quite a few times, how can we measure social impact? And Pat-nie explained there are a lot of ways of doing that. Can we also measure happiness? And actually, again, relating a bit to my research background, yes, you can measure happiness. Actually, the happiest countries, there's officially a top 10 of happy countries in the world. 6 out of those 10 are in Scandinavia. So it has apparently nothing to do with temperature. It has something to do with very much how a society is being organized. Yeah, if a society is more equal, if people have more opportunities, if people feel safe, both from, I would say, safety as a measurement of personal safety, but also safe about their future, children go to school, etc. In general, those are the happiest societies. And
it was actually Finland who is the happiest?
So explain, why is Finland a happy society? Because I learned that also it has the highest rate of suicide. So maybe, what's the combination there?
Yes, as you said, it's very cold there, but it's well-being and good school. I think it was most important. We have very good school in Finland.
So good school actually is one of the most important reasons for happiness. I also learned somewhere you need to have about an income of $75,000 a year to be good and happy. Everything above there doesn't help a lot. Below there makes you less happy because then you don't have enough money to have a reasonable lifestyle. I'd like to end actually with Paula, because I think you gave a great speech to start with, earlier in this afternoon, but also a few starting points when we discussed earlier. And the most important thing what I thought I heard today, or not the most, not the biggest thing, but it's very relevant. You talked about schmoozing, we talk too much. So how can we all relate this to action? Again, we talked about a few times of that. How can we really make it actionable? And you discussed it earlier, but maybe you want to say a few closing words.
Thank you. I think, action is, as I started to say, focus on what you can control, what is within your power. And with regard to this question of measuring happiness, I think another important way of getting action is to understand ambiguity, to not wait until you have the perfect answer, not wait until you're sure that you're happy or not happy. And I think we have to understand that there's a paradox. We actually cannot measure most of the social impacts that we seek. There are some metrics and investors look for them, but in the end you have to convince people that it's a good idea and they have to believe in the results and they have to have a tolerance for ambiguity. So somewhere in there, is the answer to getting action, is being able to act, not stupidly, but also not too late. And so since we're running against the clock, we don't want to be late. But it's better to be too early than too late, in my view, to get action.
Well, actually, we're not too early, we're not too late. It's exactly 6 o'clock. So thank you very much for your attention here, for your great questions. I think we discussed a lot of different issues. Talking again about action, often when you look at the society problems, when you look at climate change, when you look at poverty, I think we all read yesterday that 17% of the Hong Kong population is living below the poverty line, which actually I think, and the Honorary Secretary is not here anymore to ask that question, but I think that's one of the biggest issues we have in Hong Kong. We talk about enormous issues like climate change. We talk about social impact on what we do. We talk about how can we reduce poverty, and we talk mostly about how can you create a more happy society. One thing I've learned always, even though you get sometimes depressed about these enormous problems, action is the best remedy against depression. To do something about it feels always better and to create a better world. So I would like to please a round of applause for our panel here, Paula, Leonie, Anne-Marie and Pat-nie. And thank you very much for your attention today. Thank you.
And may I thank Wander for your brilliant facilitation, and this is a very fruitful discussion, a lot of things for us to think about, and definitely we want to take some actions. And the very first action everyone can take is to please fill in the feedback form. We would like to hear what you think and any other comments that you have on this topic. And if you still have some other ideas to talk about and want to know more about sustainable goals, and there is a track parallel sessions tomorrow, and it starts at 9 o'clock tomorrow at the 4th floor at our Hong Kong Convention and Exhibition Center. And in the meantime, for those of you who are going to be joining the dinner, we will have guides to be taking you out from the entrance of this room to go to the Quayside dinner. As you go out, please leave your completed questionnaire to our helpers at the entrance. Thank you very much.